Thanks, Ashley. So welcome. As Ashley said, we will be talking about studio safety today. And I would just like to preface the concept of studio safety with the fact that it is incredibly broad. This is a quick introduction to give you the basics of it, but everybody's studio is different. We are all working with similar, but often different materials, different chemicals, different processes. And that is going to be unique to you. I'm not an expert on everything, so I definitely highly recommend that you follow Kelly's advice from her presentation and click around and find out. So definitely do some research on Google or talk to other makers that you know who have experience with the process or a chemical if you are unfamiliar with it. So definitely this is an introduction and a lot of things specific to you will need special research. So I just want to put that out there that I am not an expert on everything, but I can give you a really good introduction to studio safety and the basic things that you're going to want to follow and practice. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with y'all. All right, and you should hopefully be able to see that. So just real quick, a little bit about me. I know a lot of you already know me because I've been on JBF a lot already, but a little bit about my background in jewelry. I have a BFA in metal and jewelry from Rochester Institute of Technology and an MFA in metal from the State University of New York at New Paltz. I've worked all across the industry as a bench jeweler in galleries and museums, teaching at the university level and community level, and working within community arts programs. My role at Halstead includes teaching our employees how to make jewelry, social media, making jewelry with our products for marketing purposes, and being part of the Halstead Grant Judging Committee, which is honestly one of my favorite parts of the job. It's really exciting to get to see everything that comes in. And if you're not familiar with the grant, it is open to new businesses within the first 5 years. And Hillary did a session on Monday called Grant FAQs that you can check out if you'd like to learn more about it. And a little fun fact about me, I moved to Arizona from New York. And since I've moved here, I've been making lots of prickly pear, cactus fruit, syrup, and jam. And now that you know all that, let's get into the nitty-gritty of studio safety. So the basics. These are kind of the things that should always be on hand in your jewelry studio. Always, and you should always be using them as well. Safety glasses. You always want to be able to protect your eyes, and this applies to when you're soldering, when you're using rotary tools, anything like that where things could fly off or there's flames or whatnot. Masks. N95 or KN95 are going to be your best masks for particles. So dust while standing and things like that. You don't ever want to breathe that in. If you use rubber wheels or silicone wheels, those things are terrible for you. They're really bad to breathe in. So always, please always wear a mask when using any of those tools. Some people will also choose to use respirators. They are larger and fit to your face and also have options for fume to filter out fumes. So that might be something to look into as well. But generally, N95 masks are great for particles. An apron, you want to protect your clothing. Of course, those who use pickle will know that if you leave pickle on your clothing and you don't wash it off, it will eat through the cotton. So that's why we wear aprons, to protect our clothes and therefore also protect our skin. Earplugs or ear muffs, those you're going to want to use when doing any sort of hammering or any loud rotary tools. Sometimes the polishing machine is really loud, and it's always a good idea to pop some earplugs in for that. Rubber gloves, always when using chemicals. Of course, you want to protect your skin. closed-toed shoes. We use a lot of heavy tools in the studio, and while closed-toed shoes don't protect everything, they do a lot, and they also help protect if you drop a hot piece of metal from burning your toes off or things like that. So closed-toed shoes, hair ties, you want to tie back that hair, no loose strings on your clothing, no long jewelry, none of that. It's all very apt to get caught and lit on fire or anything like that and be very dangerous. And probably one of the best things to do is always have your SDS sheets easily accessible in your studio. So Francesca briefly mentioned FDS sheets in her session, and what it stands for is your safety data sheets. So they come with everything. So all of the wheels that you use in your studio, any of the chemicals, pickle, gas, Elmer's glue has an SDS sheet. Things that you think are harmless all have an SDS sheet. And what they do is they outline the risks, the harms, all of the safety information that you're going to want to know about whatever the product is. And they're really, really important. Most websites that you purchase from will have a link on the product page to access the SDS sheet, or you can very easily download it from the manufacturer. But for anything you have in your studio, you want to have the SDS sheet, you want to have it easily accessible and organized in a way that makes sense to you. Here at Halstead, we have a binder, and I have them organized alphabetically so that I can look at them really easily. You want to, first of all, read them when you purchase a new chemical so that you understand the risks and the proper methods of handling. And you want them easily accessible. God forbid anything happened with said chemical or product that you could easily refer back to it. So that's kind of your most basic of what you're going to want to have. And then we'll dive into some of the specific areas of your studio. So we're going to start with the soldering area. The first thing to do is to cover your table in fire-resistant materials, especially if you don't have a metal table. My personal studio, I have a kitchen prep table, which are stainless steel, so that's great, but I still like to cover it with fire-resistant materials because it's just that extra level of protection. Ventilation is really important when soldering. We'll go into a couple different types in a minute after this slide. A benchtop fume extractor is a great start. By all means, it is not comprehensive, though. You can see in this photograph, we have this big silver box on the ceiling, and that is our ventilation system. So it's really robust. That's obviously the ideal situation, but we know it is not available to everyone. So I'll go into some other options for you as well. Have a fire extinguisher easily accessible without being right next to your torch tanks. So God forbid there is a fire or anything like that. If your fire extinguisher is right next to the tanks, you can't get to it because it's essentially on fire. So make sure it is close and easily accessible, but not right there, so that God forbid something does happen, you can still get to it. And always be aware of your surroundings. Make sure there aren't papers or other highly flammable materials on or near your soldering bench. Some fire-resistant materials that you can use to cover your soldering area are ceramic and stone tiles. I like to purchase these from the hardware store or a kitchen and bath store. You can buy the sample tiles, and they're usually fairly inexpensive. They come in large sizes, which is great because you can cover large areas of the table all at once. Fire brick or kiln bricks, those are great. They're thick and hefty, and solderite pads are also a great option. Solderite pads come in a couple different sizes. They have 6-inch and 12-inch. So the 12-inch sizes are great to kind of put down as a base. And we use a couple of those here at Halstead. some examples of ventilation. And like I said, all of these ventilation systems have different levels of effectiveness. Kind of your most basic is the benchtop fume extractor. Pair that with an open window, and it does work, but I would not say it is the best option. But we do understand that if you live in an apartment, you can't necessarily be cutting holes in your walls or things like that. Other options that get quite a little expensive, the ductless fume and dust extractors and elephant trunk extractors can both head into the $1,000 and $1,500 range, but they are significantly more effective than a benchtop fume extractor. But they also do not involve putting holes in your walls or your ceiling or anything like that. The ductless fume extractor, the blue one, that sits right on top of your bench. So you work kind of in that cavity and it extracts everything up. And the elephant trunk extractors are great because you can move them around and position that hose to direct at whatever you want to be sucking away, whether it's fumes or particles. They often work for both. Now, one option that is kind of in between your benchtop and your larger methods is this DIY ventilation option, which involves purchasing an inline duct fan, aluminum ducting like you would use on your dryer, a window seal plate kit, and a vent flange and vent hood. And what it does is you hook up the aluminum ducting to the fan, you route it out a window with the seal plate kit, and you have a vent hood out so it doesn't come back in. And that really is a pretty solid option for those of you that can't do construction or don't have the funds to do a major ventilation project. And as of this presentation, when I created it last month, all of these things total came to about $170. So it is a fairly affordable option. And they can all just be purchased online. Next, we have our gas tanks. We're going to talk about setup, storage, and care. Always read the directions for the torch that you have. They come with different pressure settings, so you want to make sure to set the pressure according to your torch. And along with that is you always want to use the right hoses for the right gases. Oftentimes, if you're using a torch that has a fuel oxygen setup, you are using acetylene or propane as your gas. And propane, they have essentially there are two types of hoses that you can get, and one works for anything and one only works for acetylene. So be very mindful of that because the propane will degrade the hose quicker. So you want to make sure that the one that you purchase is rated for propane if you are using it. And you want to make sure to have flashback arresters if necessary. And what flashback arresters do, they're either attached at the site of the regulator and the hose or at your torch handle and your hose, which can be a little bulky. But what they do is they prevent flame and fire from going back into the tank and creating an explosion. So you absolutely do not want that. And that will, not all torches require them, but typically if you have hoses and a gas oxygen system, you're going to want to use them. And they often also come with check valves, which prevent gas from flowing back into your hose and into the tank as well. Now these tanks are pressurized and they are highly, highly pressurized. And that is why we have regulators on them to dial back the pressure to a rate that we can use. And when you're connecting all of these things together, when you're putting your regulators on your tank and your hoses to your regulators and your torch handle and all that good stuff, you want to make sure to check all of those connections with soapy water. And if you see a leak, that soapy water will bubble up, and you'll know that you need to recheck that, retighten it, all of that good stuff to make sure there are no leaks. And you also want to check where you open and close your tank as well. That might not be something that you futz with because you get it from the welding supply store or whatever, but it is something that you do want to check because there could be a leak there. And you always also want to strap your tanks to a table leg, chain them to the wall, put them in a nice little handy carrier like we have. And because, like I mentioned, all of these tanks are pressurized, it helps prevent them from tipping over and possibly spinning out of control and becoming a projectile. We do not want that. And my rule of thumb always, always, always is to bleed your lines after you turn the torch off. So when I turn the torch off, I turn it off, I release my pressure, and then I open up my torch tip, I light it, and I wait till it burns out. And that way I know that there is no gas left in the lines, and it's just that extra double protection to make sure that you don't have any leaks. So God forbid a knob gets knocked, it's just kind of that extra added protection. And there are a couple of different gas fuel options. You have MC and B tanks, and that just refers to the sizes. It's up to you which size you're going to want to use. These typically you will purchase at a welding supply store or something like that. And when it runs out, you bring your tank in and they give you one all filled up. If you do purchase your own tanks, like from a jewelry supply company, you'll get a nice shiny new tank. And if you bring it to your welding supply store, they will give you back a not so nice and shiny tank. So if you do want to keep your shiny tank, just be mindful that it probably will take a little bit for them to fill it. Whereas if you just kind of use one of theirs, they just give you one right then and there and you can drive away, which is awesome. I know a lot of people who, instead of buying MC or B tanks of propane, they buy the propane camping tanks, which is great if you have like a Smith Little torch and are working on smaller pieces and not using a ton of fuel. They really do last a surprisingly long time, and you can purchase them right at, you know, your outdoor store, which is awesome. A lot of people have been using oxygen concentrators. And what those are they essentially turn your ambient air into pure oxygen so that you never need a tank, which is great, but also there are some limitations with how pressurized they can be, and they do cost a little bit of money to invest in one. So that's just something to look into and see if it's the best option for you. We also have butane torches and refills, which are great if you're just getting started and learning. You can buy them at the hardware store, as well as MAP gas torches and gases. Also can buy them at the hardware store. Great if you're just getting started. They don't have as much control over the flame size, but you can certainly do a lot with them. Moving on to acid baths and pickles. The first thing is always to keep your pickle pot under or near ventilation, especially if you are using warm pickle. It does work best when it's warm, and it does release fumes that you don't want to be breathing in. You're always going to want to add the acid to the water to prevent splashes or things like that. And there are a few different types of pickle, but if you are concerned about the harsher acid-based pickles like sodium bisulfate, you can use a vinegar and salt solution that is a little bit less harsh. And especially with pickle, you always want to make sure to dispose of it properly. I know there's a lot of talk about this, and you've probably heard a couple different things. But ideally, you're going to neutralize the pickle with baking soda until it no longer bubbles, and that's going to require a lot of baking soda. And then really you want to take it to a hazardous waste disposal facility because there is heavy metal in your pickle. So that's the copper that comes out. So after you solder, your piece oxidizes, and what the pickle does is it removes those oxides, and that remains in the pickle solution. Now, every location is different, so I highly recommend that you reach out to your local waste removal agency for information and best practices on ways to dispose of your pickle. They will be able to tell you exactly what you need to do for where you live. And like I said, everywhere is different. But that's going to be your basic process for disposing of pickle. In general, some chemical best practices, you want to store them in proper cabinets. Flammable should be stored in a dedicated flammable cabinet, like the image to the right. You can buy cabinets specifically for this purpose, and in general, they're always metal, so God forbid something does spontaneously combust. It is combined in this metal cabinet and is unlikely to spread. The cabinet should lock to avoid easy access by those who don't know proper handling. This might be your children, or it might be your husband, or your wife, or your best friend who just doesn't know how to work with these chemicals. Know what chemicals you have and what should not be stored next to each other. Store acids separate from other chemicals and flammables. And this is really important because the ingredients of one chemical can interact with those of another and create a reaction that you don't want. So make sure to do your research on what you have and what it reacts with, and make sure not to store those things next to each other. Containers. No food containers ever, please. That also goes back to eating in the studio. Please don't eat in the studio, because if you're eating, you could also be eating metal. You could be eating your silicone grinding wheel dust. We just don't want to do it. Don't want to do it. So no food containers, no Starbucks cups. You can use Tupperwares, but don't use any, clear plastic Tupperwares, but don't use any yogurt cups or things like that, because it can be misunderstood for someone who is not in your studio or know. If you have a Starbucks cup with fresh pickle in it, fresh pickle is clear. Someone might mistake that as water. So please, no food containers. If possible, store the chemical in the container that it came in. That way it's labeled. Also often has hazards associated with it, written right on there. And you want to use tightly closable, unbreakable containers like glass. Continuing on this, always use in a well-ventilated area, which your SDS sheet will absolutely tell you whether you need ventilation for that chemical or not. Have a spill kit ready. These typically include personal protective equipment like gloves, an apron, absorbent materials like rags, pads, and paper towels, a scoop and a brush to scoop anything up, and disposal bags. You can buy these kits pre-assembled, or you can make your own. And make sure that everything is labeled clearly. You can see here in this container, I have liver of sulfur. I have labeled it, and I have also put a date on it to know when it was used, so that I know when it is able to be disposed of as well. Rotary tools such as your flex shaft, your micromotor, bench polisher, and more, which means a drill press, anything that spins really fast. Always keep your long hair, jewelry, and sweatshirt strings tied back. Huge hazard. Safety glasses and masks are an absolute must with this. If you wear regular glasses, you can use a face shield over that. Honestly, I like face shields a lot because it protects my whole face, especially if I'm using a polishing machine. And always be sure to do regular maintenance of your machines. This is really important. We have a blog on flex shaft maintenance and a YouTube video on bench polisher maintenance, as well as how to use it. Ashley is going to put the links to those into the chat, but always know how to maintain your tools. You can speak to the manufacturer about this. You can do research online, or YouTube are great resources for that. But having tools that are in tip-top shape and performing well is going to reduce the possibilities of injury and risk immensely. So please, please upkeep your tools. As well as the proper posture and stance is really important to avoiding any risks as well. You can see at the bench polisher here, I'm standing facing the machine straight. I've got a wide, even stance. My elbows are tucked in to my body. They're not all flailing around, sticking out. And I'm working on the bottom third of the wheel to reduce any risk of my piece catching and flinging out of control. So that all comes with learning how to use the tools properly. If you don't know how to use them, if it's a new tool for you, do your research, reach out to a jeweler that you know has one that can teach you. And there's no harm in doing any of that. I've used machines all across a bunch of different studios, and I like to get a demo on it kind of in every studio, just because every machine can be a little different. So I like to speak to someone who's used that one specifically and can just give me a refresher, even though I might have used it a million times in a previous studio. Some storage tips. Store like-minded tools together for an easier workflow. You can see in this cabinet here, I've got everything labeled. I've got my polishing drawer, my flex shaft drawer, all kinds of things so that I know when I'm looking for it, I can just easily reach it. Steel tools will rust if they are not cared for properly. And that just means, moisture from the air can get to them. Don't leave them in a pile of water or things like that. You can keep them in airtight containers with silica packs. Those are those little things that will come in your new shoes or whatever. And what they do is they absorb moisture. And I like to take them from new shoes because I also like to buy shoes. But you can also just purchase them as is on the internet. And they're awesome. My personal studio was in storage for about 2 years. So all my tools were wrapped up with silica packs in plastic bins, and none of them rusted. So that's great. You can also wrap them in plastic wrap with oil, will help prevent any rusting. And where was I going to go with this? Rust on your steel tools can expedite if you live in super humid areas or places near the beach. You're going to want to keep your steel tools in drawers or bins, not out hanging on walls or things like that, to help prevent that rust. And reiterating, no food containers. And lastly, what I want to talk about is the safety of your body. Your muscles and your skeleton have proper safety procedures too. And if you overwork them or don't take care of them properly, you can't ever make jewelry. And it doesn't matter how safe the rest of your studio is if you can't make the jewelry. So be sure to take frequent breaks, making sure to get up and walk around and move your body, stretch regularly, be aware of your posture. I'm going to play this little video that is courtesy of Wellness for Makers, and just watch the different ways that she's holding her body here. I'm going to play that one more time for you. So we always want to keep a neutral posture as often as possible, and always alter your setup to better fit you. It's not one size fits all. You buy your bench online and it comes as a preset size, but for me, I'm 5'4". It's not going to fit me the same way that it's going to fit someone who's 6 foot. So feel free to alter your setup to better fit you. Get a chair that has a higher or lower range. Prop your bench up on bricks or 2x4s. Cut the legs down if you need to. So your tools are there to serve you. So make sure that they serve you as best as possible. We've got some stretches here that are just great for daily stretching while you're in the studio. The first one kind of works out your shoulders and the back of your neck, stretching out the back of your arms, opening up your chest in the third picture to help prevent against any hunching that you may do. Stretching out your hands. We're often holding really tiny things. And this also applies to working smarter and not harder. So if you're working with really small things, maybe put it in a ring clamp. It will cut down on the strain of your hands, but it still is super easy and workable. And we've got a couple more stretches. Forward fold, great, stretches out the legs as well as the back and the neck. Laying on the floor, ideal. That is probably what I will do after this presentation and JBF is over. I'm going to lay on the floor for a little bit. We're going to stretch out our necks as well. So they're good things to just work into your day. I like to do all of my stretches at the very end of the day before bed. I've made it part of my routine. It takes me not even 5 minutes to do them. And I found when I was working as a bench jeweler full-time at the bench, it really helped cut down on any possible back pain or neck pain that I might have had from working. So I highly recommend stretching. And some general resources for you. So Ashley is going to put links in the chat to all of the online resources that we have. The Halstead Jewelry Supplies blog and YouTube channel are really great resources. We've got tons of video and articles about safety-related things that you're going to want to check out. Ergonomics.com is a resource for jewelers. They post their own blog articles as well as have forums and chats that you can participate in and ask questions to the general jewelry audience. Wellnessformakers.com. So that video was courtesy of Wellness for Makers, and it was started by Missy Graf Ballone, who is a jeweler herself, but she is also a certified massage therapist and she's a yoga teacher. And basically what she realized was no one was talking about the way that we work and how it affects our body. So she created a resource, Wellness for Makers, that teaches us how to do that so that we can take care of our bodies as well. And I know that she has a ton of resources on her website, but I also know that she'll do one-on-ones with artists. And so she'll work with you, look at your studio, how you work in your studio, and give you tips and tricks to better work in your space for your body. And then we also have NancyLTHamilton.com. She's also a jeweler and writes a lot of great blogs about studio and safety and tools and things like that. So another great resource. We also have a couple books and print resources. Metalsmith Tech, which is an insert that comes with Metalsmith magazine, and that's published by the Society of North American Goldsmiths. What you should know about health and safety in the jewelry industry, Jewelry Workers Health and Safety Research Group put that out, and you can Google that and you'll be able to find it. Missy wrote a book called Wellness for Makers, so definitely check that out. And the last two are also books, Artist Beware by Michael McCann and the Artist Complete Health and Safety Guide by Monona Russell. And those two are not jewelry specific, but often safety tips for artists can work across the board for whatever medium you're working in. So they're definitely worth checking out. And I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I see that there's a lot of things in the chat. So if you have any questions, I am here to answer some of them. But first, I'm going to take a quick sip of water.
Yeah, so there were definitely a few questions, and there's definitely a lot of really good conversation about things.
Great.
So one of the questions was talking about ventilation. Is the inline fan option good enough, or should they start thinking about upgrading it at some point?
It's a pretty solid option, but if you can, if you do have the resources or can save up for them, I would definitely recommend upgrading. If you own your own house and you know you're going to be there for a while, I would definitely recommend upgrading to some sort of integrated system if you can.
Okay. There was someone asking, actually, there was a lot of conversation about pickle.
Yeah,
So
that's a topic.
disposal of it, and someone brought up the citric acid. Are there fumes from that that are still just as dangerous as the other types of pickle?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, any of your pickle, I mean, citric acid is one of the better options, but I mean, once you heat any of that stuff up, you tend to not want to breathe it in. So keep it near an open window under your ventilation system. And along the same lines of that, never quench your hot piece into the pickle because it's just further releasing those fumes. So pop it in water and then your pickle.
Okay. There was a question about storing extra butane containers. Should they be in a metal cabinet?
Um, Yeah, not a bad idea, especially because they're smaller. But I don't know if they have to be, but if you have a metal cabinet, yeah, for sure, put them in there.
Okay. Someone was wondering what kind of oil you were using to keep the steel tools from rusting.
Sure. You can use kind of just like your general 3-in-1 tool machine oil. Some people really like to use WD-40. I've heard both sides of the story on WD-40. Some people really like it, some people don't. Yeah, so kind of just like a general neutral oil will do the trick, especially if you then wrap it in plastic, keeps it all sealed in there.
Okay. So now there's looking for recommendations on studio stools or chairs with wheels. So what's kind of something that people should be looking for in that?
Whew, that's like you could go down the studio stool chair rabbit hole like so far. Then I would say the main thing you want is something with an adjustable height. I That's really important. I do know that Missy on Wellness for Makers talks about stools a lot. There are a couple different options. Some of them are kind of like a horse's saddle. Some of them have backs, some of them don't. A lot of your stool and your chair is what's comfortable for you, but also making sure to vary the position a lot. So regardless of what chair you're sitting in, you don't want to be sitting in the same position for hours on end. So that either involves getting up, crossing your legs, uncrossing your legs, all that kind of stuff. It's just varying your position so that you're not in the same one for too long. But a variable height is really important because you probably won't want the same height for sawing that you will for drilling or polishing or finishing. So adjustable height for sure.
Okay. There's a question in there about welding goggles as far as taking care of eyes long term.
Yes. So those would be any of your dark glasses. So they're typically tinted green and they come in different shades. You've got 3 all the way up to 10. If you're welding, you're using the darker options, closer to a shade 7, 10, things like that. With your micro torch, it is often recommended that you use a shade 3. You can see through those pretty easily, but they do help protect against the brightness of that flame. And that will be something that you'll just have to do research with whatever you're using, whether you do or do not need to use dark glasses. If you're doing permanent jewelry, the pulse arc welders have a super bright flash. So you are going to want to have dark glasses on, or if you're looking through the microscope of the welder, it will darken automatically for you. If you have clients, you are going to want to give them a pair of dark glasses, always. And if you're soldering platinum, absolute must wearing dark glasses.
Okay. Oh, there's one more. Are Hako filters recommended if she has all the windows closed?
I'm not familiar with what those are. So I unfortunately can't speak to that. I'm guessing it has something to do with ventilation, but I don't know those filters specifically or what they're attached to.
They're the tabletop fume extractor.
The tabletop fume extractors are not your most hardy fume extractors. So if you can pop open the windows, I would recommend it.
Okay. And then we'll do one more question. For regular silver soldering, would you recommend using dark glasses?
I personally don't, but part of it does come down to the torch you're using. I know it is recommended that if you're using a micro torch like a Smith Little, that you do wear a shade 3 glasses, because that inner flame can be really, really bright.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys, everyone, so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, you can, of course, put it in the lobby chat. And, so like she said in the beginning, there's a lot of very specific things. So it may be something you kind of just have to look at depending on what you have. So our last session of the day is going to be the final wrap up. We'll have another trivia giveaway for a $100 credit with Halstead, some more trends talk, and just a kind of final wrap up and discussion for the week. And we're so glad you could all join us here. So we hope to see you in that final session. It'll be starting in about 10 minutes or so. So we will see you over there. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.